I always thought the most painful sound in the world was a gunshot. Turns out, it's the sound of your own father whispering, "Please, just take her. She's all I have left." I can still see that moment like it's playing on a cracked TV screen in some dark motel room. The rain hitting the concrete like tiny fists, the cold wind crawling under my skin, and me, 16, shaking, barefoot, standing on the edge of a warehouse floor, watching the man who raised me hand me over like a debt he couldn't pay. If you've ever been betrayed by the one person you trusted with your whole chest, you might feel this one. Because I didn't get a warning. I didn't get a choice. I didn't even get a goodbye. 1 second I was my father's daughter. The next, I was property. Sold to the most feared, most ruthless mafia boss in the entire East Coast, Dante Moretti. A man people didn't look in the eyes unless they had a death wish. A man whose name made grown men shake. A man whose shadow felt heavier than a coffin lid. And me, I was the price he accepted. Before I take you deeper into this story, into the betrayal, the love, the lust, the revenge, the nights I cried until my ribs ached, I want you to do something for me. If you love these kinds of real, raw human confessions, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. It matters, more than you know. My name is Zariah Cole, and the year all this happened, I was 16, living with my father in a cramped apartment above a liquor store in East Baltimore. Back then, I still believed life was something you could dream your way out of. Back then, I still believed my father loved me. I didn't tell anyone this until now. Because the night he sold me was the night everything changed. The night the world cracked open. The night I learned what fear tastes like and what it costs to survive a monster everyone else runs from. And this is where it all began. If I close my eyes long enough, I can still smell that tiny Baltimore apartment, the mix of engine oil, burnt rice, and the cheap lemon cleaner my father used whenever he wanted to pretend things were okay. Back then, I didn't understand how a home could feel tired, like even the walls were holding their breath. I just knew something was wrong. Something had been wrong for a long time. The light bulbs flickered like they were scared to stay on. The rent notices came in envelopes the color of warning signs, and my father's shoulders got heavier every month like he was carrying a graveyard on his back. But I loved him. I trusted him. I believed every word he told me, especially the lies painted pretty enough to look true. "Zariah," he'd say, "we just need one good break, one job, one chance, and everything will turn around." I didn't know that sometimes a chance isn't a blessing. It's a trap wearing hope like perfume. That summer, the heat sat heavy over East Baltimore, thick enough to taste. Kids played in the street with busted water guns, sirens sang their usual song, and I spent my days sketching fashion designs in the margins of my notebook. My dream? New York Fashion Week. My reality? Sewing ripped jackets for neighbors to buy school shoes. But I still believed in miracles. I still believed my destiny was bigger than the block I grew up on. And maybe that was my first mistake. Thinking dreams were enough to save you when the world you lived in was drowning. Looking back, all the signs were there. The late night whispers, the phone calls he didn't answer, the bruised knuckles, the fear in his eyes he tried to hide behind a laugh that didn't reach his face. My father was running from something, or someone, and the night I found him shaking in the dark kitchen, staring at a stack of bills he didn't have the strength to open, was the night I realized the truth. The world had already chosen the price he would pay. And it would be me. I remember the exact moment the ground beneath my life began to crack. It was a Wednesday. Slow. Ordinary. The kind of day you forget unless something unforgettable happens. I was sitting on the fire escape outside our window, legs dangling as I watched people below living their regular messy lives. Mrs. Lane yelling at her kids for stealing popsicles. Mr. Antonio sweeping the sidewalk like it was his personal war. The usual noise of a city that didn't know me and didn't care to. That was when I saw him, the man my father later called the beginning of the end. He stepped out of a black SUV that looked too expensive for our block. His suit was sharp, too sharp, like it didn't belong anywhere near cracked sidewalks. He scanned the street, his eyes slow, cold, calculating. A predator checking for movement. And when his gaze lifted to the fire escape, to me, I felt something freeze inside my chest. I didn't know who he was, but something about him felt wrong, like danger didn't follow him. I hurried inside, heart racing, and found my father already staring through the window blinds at the same man. But what scared me wasn't the stranger, it was the look on my father's face, a look I had never seen before. Not anger, not worry, not fear. Something worse, surrender. That night he barely spoke to me. He paced the apartment, muttering things he thought I couldn't hear. I'm out of time? He found me. God help me. Over and over, like a broken prayer. I wanted to ask what was happening, but his eyes told me he was drowning in a storm he'd been hiding from me for years. He didn't sleep. I didn't either. The city outside moved on like nothing was wrong, but I felt it in my bones. Something dark had stepped onto our street, and it wasn't leaving without taking something with it. The next morning, the world pretended to be normal again. Birds chirped on telephone wires. Buses hissed down cracked roads. Kids laughed their way to summer school. But our apartment felt hollow, like all the air had been sucked out. My father cooked breakfast, or rather burned it. He moved like a ghost, flinching at every knock, jumping at the sound of footsteps in the hall. I sat at the table watching him, trying to understand the man standing in front of me. This wasn't the same father who used to braid my hair before school, who used to chase away nightmares with silly jokes. No, this was a man backed into a corner with nowhere to run. When I finally found the courage to ask what was happening, he froze. Literally froze. His hands shook. His voice broke. Zariah, there are things I've done, people I owe, mistakes I can't undo. I remember clutching my sketchbook so tightly the papers bent. We can fix it, I said. Whatever it is, we can fix it. But he didn't look at me. He didn't even try to pretend. Not this, he whispered. Not this time. Those words pushed a cold hand around my heart. Later that afternoon, I found him in his room sitting on the edge of the bed, head in his hands. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, defeated, broken. When I sat beside him, he didn't speak. He just wrapped his arm around me and held on like he knew the world was about to steal me away. I didn't understand then, but he was saying goodbye. Not with words, with fear, with shame, with the silence of a man who has already made a decision he knows will destroy the only good thing he has left. By sunset, the decision had already found us. It started with a knock, not loud, not rushed, slow, heavy, final. My father's whole body stiffened. Mine too. He didn't tell me to hide. He didn't tell me to run. Maybe because he knew it wouldn't matter. Maybe because he'd already given up fighting. When he opened the door, the man from the SUV stepped inside like he owned the building. Two others followed him, one tall and silent, one shorter with tattoos crawling up his neck like vines. Their eyes scanned everything, including me. I felt exposed, like they could see my heartbeat through my skin. Tariq, the leader said, my father's name rolling off his tongue like a threat he didn't have to say out loud. My father nodded weakly. The conversation that followed wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. That made it worse. The debt is overdue, the man said. You've had more chances than you deserved. My father swallowed hard. I just need time. Time, the man repeated, amused. You had time. You wasted it. And then his eyes slid to me, not with lust, not with curiosity, with calculation, like he was assessing a piece of property. She'll do. I felt my stomach drop. Heat crawled up my spine. My father stepped forward, voice shaking. Please, she's my daughter. And you should have thought about that before you gambled away money that wasn't yours. I didn't understand half of it, but I understood the look in my father's eyes, the look of a man choosing which way his world would end. The silence stretched, thick, unbearable, and then he nodded. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stared at him, waiting for him to say it was a joke, waiting for him to say he died before letting anyone touch me, waiting for him to be the father I believed he was. But he just whispered, I'm sorry, Zariah. The sorry that tastes like betrayal. The sorry that stains your soul. The men moved fast. One grabbed my arm. Another shoved a contract toward my father. Something about ownership, repayment, collateral. I felt the world tilt. My voice came out weak, breaking. Dad, please. He couldn't look at me. Not even once. Not even when they pulled me toward the door. Not even when I begged. Not even when I told him I loved him. He just stood there, broken, trembling, watching the only family he had left get taken. When they dragged me outside, rain hit my face like cold slaps. The black SUV waited, dark, hungry, final. The man opened the door and said quietly, "Dante Moretti will decide what happens next." That was the first time I heard the Mafia King's name, the first time I felt true fear, the first time I realized my life was no longer mine. As the door slammed shut behind me, my last glimpse of home was my father collapsing to his knees. And that was the moment I learned that love can wound you deeper than any bullet. But betrayal can kill the girl you used to be before anyone else even gets the chance. The SUV smelled like leather, gun oil, and danger. I sat wedged between two men built like prison walls, my wrists trembling in my lap as the city blurred past the tinted windows. Baltimore at night always felt loud, alive, full of motion. But inside that car, everything was silent. Too silent. The kind of silence that makes you hear your own heartbeat, fast and scared, like it's trying to run before your body can. I stared at the driver's reflection in the rearview mirror. Stone-faced, jaw tight, eyes forward, like he'd done this 1,000 times and didn't plan on stopping now. Every mile we drove away from my father felt like another piece of me breaking off and falling behind on the asphalt. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass, watching familiar streets turn into unfamiliar ones, watching hope shrink until it felt smaller than the space between my fingers. I didn't speak. They didn't either. But the silence spoke enough. It told me I wasn't being taken to someone who cared whether I lived or died. I was being delivered, a package, a payment, a thing. When the SUV finally stopped, it wasn't at the place I expected. Not a warehouse, not a basement, not some rundown hideout where screams could vanish into the walls. No, it was a mansion, a massive, iron-gated estate standing like a fortress on the edge of the city, hidden behind tall trees and stone pillars that looked carved from another century. Lights glowed warm behind polished windows, too beautiful for the monsters who lived inside. The gravel crunched under our feet as they pulled me from the car, my sneakers slipping as I tried to steady myself. A cold wind brushed through the trees like the world itself was warning me to run. But where would I go? One of the men knocked on the front doors, huge wooden things with carvings of lions that looked alive under the porch lights. The door swung open slowly, revealing a man in a dark vest, his hair slicked back, his eyes unreadable. He studied me for a long moment before stepping aside. "Mr. Moretti is waiting." His voice was low, smooth, professional, but there was something underneath it, something like pity, or maybe resignation. I couldn't tell. All I knew was that stepping through those doors felt like stepping into a place where my fate was already written. The mansion was breathtaking. That was the first thing I noticed. Marble floors polished enough to catch your reflection. A grand staircase with golden railings. Chandeliers dripping crystals like frozen rain. Everything looked untouched by the world I came from, as if poverty, fear, and desperation were things that only happened to people outside these walls. The men led through a long hallway lined with portraits of people who all had the same look in their eyes. Power. Cold power. The kind that didn't need to raise its voice to command the room. At the end of the hall, a pair of double doors opened, revealing a room that was somehow both beautiful and terrifying. Bookshelves stretched to the ceiling. A fire crackled in a stone fireplace. And behind a massive mahogany desk sat the man whose name made even killers swallow hard. Dante Moretti. He didn't look up at first. He just continued signing something with a black pen, the scratch of ink the only sound in the world. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes, cold, sharp, too observant, met mine. And in that moment, I understood why people feared him. It wasn't his reputation. It wasn't the stories. It was him, his presence, his stillness, his silence that felt louder than a scream. "Come closer," he said, and his voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It moved through the room with the kind of authority that made your knees weak. I took a small step forward, another. The fire warmed my skin, but my hands stayed cold. Dante leaned back in his chair, studying me like I was something he'd ordered and wanted to inspect before deciding whether to keep or return. He wasn't old, maybe late 20s, early 30s, but his eyes held years no calendar could track. "Your father owes me a significant amount of money," he said calmly. "Money he has no ability to repay." My throat tightened. He didn't tell me." "Of course he didn't," Dante replied. "Cowards rarely speak the truth." He stood then, slowly, deliberately, walking around the desk until he was only a few feet from me. Every step he took felt like a hand closing around my lungs. You will work off his debt, he said. You will follow my rules. You will not run. You will not disobey, and if you do... He paused, leaning in just slightly, his breath brushing my cheek. There are consequences even hell won't save you from. I swallowed hard, my legs shaking so badly I almost stumbled. I didn't reply. I didn't trust my voice to hold. Then something unexpected happened. Something small but powerful enough to confuse me. He stepped back just a little, his jaw tightening as if he was fighting a thought he didn't want. His eyes moved over my face, lingering, not in a way that made my skin crawl, but in a way that made something inside my chest twist painfully. For a moment, he looked almost conflicted. Almost. But then it was gone, replaced by that same cold, ruling expression that made everyone obey him. Take her to the East Wing, he ordered the men. She starts tomorrow. The men nodded and grabbed my arm again, though not as roughly as before. As they escorted me out of the office, I could feel Dante's gaze burning into my back. Not cruel, not kind, something in between, something I couldn't name yet. The hallway felt colder on the way out, the lights dimmer, the silence heavier. My steps echoed on the marble as we walked, each one pulling me deeper into a life I never asked for, a life I didn't understand. A life owned by a man whose eyes felt like a warning and a promise at the same time. And right as they were pushing open the door to the East Wing, I heard his voice one last time, low and almost too quiet to catch. Make sure she doesn't break. The East Wing felt like a world trapped inside its own silence. The men who escorted me stopped at a heavy wooden door, unlocked it, and pushed it open without saying a word. Inside was a bedroom bigger than the entire apartment I grew up in, with a massive window overlooking the dark stretch of land surrounding the estate. The walls were painted a soft cream, the bed covered in white sheets, too clean, too untouched. A small lamp glowed warm on the nightstand, as if pretending this was a place for comfort and not captivity. When the men finally left and the lock clicked behind them, the silence swallowed the room whole. I walked slowly, touching the edge of the dresser, the curtains, the cold, smooth surface of the glass. Everything was beautiful, expensive, luxurious, but nothing felt like mine. I sat on the edge of the bed and clenched my fingers into the sheets. That was when it hit me, not the fear, not the confusion, the grief. A heavy, suffocating grief that pressed on my chest until breathing felt like punishment. I curled into myself, hugging my knees, trying not to think about the fact that my father had chosen to give me away. Trying not to think about the strange, unreadable look in Dante Moretti's eyes. Trying not to think about tomorrow. But the thoughts came anyway. Sharp, painful, relentless. And for the first time since the SUV swallowed me whole, I cried. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet tears slipping down my face as I tried to remember what it felt like to be safe. I didn't sleep that night. The bed was too soft, the room too clean, the silence too loud. Every small sound, the rustle of leaves outside, the distant footsteps in the hallway, the ticking of a clock I couldn't see, felt like a warning. I sat by the window, hugging a blanket around my shoulders, staring at the moon hanging low over the estate. It felt close enough to touch, and yet impossibly far. I wondered if my father was still kneeling on the apartment floor, if guilt had sunk into his bones, or if relief had taken its place. I wondered if he even realized what he'd done. My fingers touched the cold glass, tracing the reflection of my own face. Tired eyes, swollen from crying, a vulnerability I didn't know how to hide. That's when I noticed something on the nightstand, a folded piece of paper I hadn't seen before. My heart jumped. I reached for it slowly, unfolding it with trembling hands. The handwriting was neat, sharp, masculine. You will wake at 6 a.m. Clothes are in the closet. You will be escorted to your duties. Do not leave the East Wing without permission, DM. I read the note 3 times. It wasn't the words themselves that shook me. It was the fact that he'd written them. Dante Moretti didn't strike me as the kind of man who wasted ink on people he didn't care about, which meant he wrote it for control, or habit, or something else, something I didn't have a name for yet. I placed the note back on the nightstand, but sleep still didn't come. Only questions. When morning arrived, it came too fast. A knock echoed through the room, firm but not aggressive, and before I could respond, the door opened. A woman stepped inside, She was tall, elegant, dressed in a black uniform that fit her like it was tailored for her alone. Her skin was a warm caramel, her hair pulled into a neat bun, her expression calm but unreadable. "I'm Celine," she said, voice smooth and controlled. "I'll be instructing you on your duties." She handed me a set of folded clothes, simple black trousers and a fitted top. "You have 10 minutes." I nodded, too scared to speak. Celine didn't look at me like the others had. She didn't see me as a problem or a burden or a transaction. She saw me like I was inevitable, just another girl in a long line of girls who had walked these halls before me. I dressed quickly, the clothes fitting surprisingly well, and followed her out of the room. The East Wing's corridors were long and quiet, sunlight spilling through tall windows onto marble floors. "You'll be assigned light tasks for now," she explained. "Cleaning, organizing, learning the layout. Mr. Moretti expects discipline." Her tone shifted subtly on his name, respect mixed with a hint of something else. Fear, admiration, loyalty? I couldn't tell. "What happens if I mess up?" I asked softly. She glanced at me, not cruelly, not kindly, just truthfully. "Don't." We walked past several doors, some open, some locked, some guarded. The mansion felt alive, like each hallway had its own pulse, each room its own secrets. Celine guided me into a dining hall so large the echo of our footsteps faded into nothing. "You'll start here," she said. "Dust the shelves, wipe the table surfaces, don't touch the liquor cabinet." I nodded and got to work, my hands still shaking, my mind racing. As I wiped down a glass table, I caught my reflection again. This time, I looked different, still scared, still lost. But there was something else there too. Something like defiance. I didn't want to be here. I didn't want to serve a man who owned fear like a crown. But I also didn't want to break. Not for him, not for anyone. Celine watched me quietly from the doorway, her gaze thoughtful, like she was trying to decide whether to warn me or encourage me. In the end, she did neither. She simply said, "He doesn't like weakness," and walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the weight of her words. I was still cleaning when I felt it, the shift in the air, the soft hush that falls when power enters a room. I didn't have to turn around to know he was there. Dante Moretti moved without making a sound, yet the very space around him changed, like the world leaned in closer when he walked by. I kept my head down, heart thundering, trying to pretend I didn't notice. But then he spoke, his voice quiet but impossible to ignore. "You're awake early." My breath caught. I turned slowly, and there he was, dark suit, sleeves rolled, eyes sharp enough to cut through silence. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if I should bow or run or freeze. His gaze traveled over my face, not hungrily, not cruelly, assessingly, like he was trying to understand something that didn't make sense to him. "Good," he said finally. "Obedience will keep you alive." Then he stepped closer, so close the warmth of his breath brushed my cheek. His scent was clean, expensive, dangerous. My body tensed, every instinct screaming. And then, in a voice softer than I expected, he murmured, "But don't mistake obedience for weakness." For a split second, just one, his eyes softened. Or maybe I imagined it, because when he stepped back, the cold was back in his expression. "Continue," he said, and walked away, leaving my knees weak and my mind spinning. I stared at the doorway he disappeared through, my heart beating unevenly as a terrifying thought settled over me. He didn't just own my debt, he owned my fear, and he knew it. The morning flowed into afternoon in a blur of footsteps, commands, quiet whispers, and the soft clatter of silverware echoing through endless halls. Every part of the mansion felt intentional, polished, guarded, like nothing happened without Dante Moretti's permission. As I dusted another shelf in a hallway lined with tall windows, I caught Celine speaking quietly with one of the guards. Their voices were low, but their expressions weren't. Serious, sharp, watchful. When they noticed me looking, the conversation snapped shut like a door slammed in my face. It reminded me that in this house, curiosity wasn't a trait, it was a threat. So I kept my eyes down and my hands busy, even though my mind refused to settle. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow felt like someone was watching me. Every echo of footsteps sent a shiver up my spine, because sometimes they belonged to Dante, and sometimes, terrifyingly, they didn't. Yet the strangest thing was how quickly my body started to memorize him, the rhythm of his steps, the way the air shifted just moments before he appeared, the faint scent of cedar and cold metal that lingered when he passed. It was wrong. It was dangerous. And it made something inside me tighten with a confusion I didn't have a name for. I told myself it was fear. I prayed it was fear. But a small voice in my chest whispered something else. Something I tried to bury before it could grow roots. By late afternoon, Celine returned, her expression unreadable as she observed the work I'd done. She didn't praise me. She didn't scold me. She simply gestured for me to follow. "There's something you need to know," she said as we walked down a narrow side corridor I hadn't seen before. The lights were dimmer here, the walls colder, the silence heavier. "This house," she continued, "is not like the world outside. Loyalty is everything. Secrets are currency, and mistakes." She paused, turning to look at me with eyes that held more shadows than light. "Mistakes can cost you more than your life." I swallowed hard, the warning settling deep into my bones. "Why are you telling me this?" She looked away, her jaw tense. "Because no one warned me," she whispered. Her voice cracked on the last word, barely, but enough that I felt it. There was a story behind her eyes, a long one, carved into her like scars under silk. I wanted to ask. I wanted to understand her. But the way her gaze hardened again told me that questions had consequences. So I stayed silent as she led me through the corridor until we reached a door unlike the others. Heavy, steel, uncomfortable. "Never open this door," she said. "Never ask what's behind it." Before I could reply, distant footsteps echoed behind us, slow, purposeful, and far too familiar. Celine straightened instantly. "He's coming. Move." I turned, heart pounding, just as Dante appeared at the end of the corridor. He didn't look angry. He didn't look rushed. He looked curious. His eyes moved from Celine to me, lingering longer on me than I expected. "You're showing her the house," he said, his voice low. Not a question, not an accusation. But Celine's posture stiffened anyway. "Only the east wing, sir." Dante's gaze drifted to the steel door behind us, the one Celine had just warned me about. Something flickered in his expression, a shadow, a memory, a threat, before his eyes returned to me. "Zariah," he said, as if testing how my name felt on his tongue. A strange chill ran down my spine. "Follow me." Celine stepped aside immediately, her face unreadable, and I had no choice but to go. Dante didn't speak again until we were in a part of the estate filled with soft golden light filtering through high windows. "You've been obedient," he said calmly, hands clasped behind his back. "Quiet, focused, that is, surprising." I frowned slightly. "Why?" He glanced at me, something sharp but almost thoughtful in his eyes. "Because most people break their first day here." His words hit me too fast, too cold. "I'm not most people," I whispered before I could stop myself. Dante stopped walking, turned, and for a moment, just a moment, his eyes warmed like a tiny spark had broken through the ice. He stepped closer, slow and deliberate, until the distance between us was so thin I could feel the heat of his breath. My pulse stumbled. His gaze dragged over my face, not in a possessive way, not in a cruel way, but in a way that felt dangerously close to fascination. "You're not," he murmured, "and that's inconvenient." I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. I didn't move. Because something shifted in the silence between us, something I wasn't ready for, something he didn't want to acknowledge, something neither of us had the right to feel. His jaw tightened, and he stepped back suddenly, like he'd crossed a line he wasn't supposed to cross. "Return to your tasks," he said, his voice once again steel. But as he turned away, something tugged painfully in my chest, an invisible thread tying us together in a way that terrified me more than anything else in this house. Because I didn't want to feel drawn to him. I didn't want to notice the softness that flickered in his eyes when he forgot to hide it. I didn't want my breath to catch when he said my name. And yet it already had. It happened so fast afterward, I barely had time to think. I had just stepped back into the dining hall when I heard a shout. A man's voice, angry, sharp, echoing through the mansion like a warning siren. Celine appeared out of nowhere, her calm mask gone. "Zariah, move, now." She grabbed my wrist, pulling me behind a pillar just as two guards dragged someone across the marble floor, someone beaten, bloodied, barely conscious. My hands flew to my mouth. My eyes widened. Celine's grip tightened. "Don't look," she whispered. But I couldn't look away. The man on the floor groaned through broken teeth. "Dante, I didn't betray you. I swear." Dante stepped into view slowly, his expression unreadable, his presence colder than I had ever seen. He stood over the bleeding man, watching him struggle. And then, in one calm, steady sentence that froze my whole soul, he said, "Loyalty is not a thing you swear, it's a thing you prove." And with a nod, he sealed the man's fate. I felt the world tilt. I felt the truth slam into me with the force of a bullet. The man my father sold me to wasn't just feared, he was merciless. And whatever was growing between us, whatever I pretended wasn't there, was only going to make things far, far more dangerous. The house didn't breathe for the rest of the day. Every corridor felt tighter, every shadow felt heavier, every whisper felt like it carried the weight of a gun. After witnessing the brutal reminder of what Dante did to people who defied him, something inside me shifted. Fear wasn't new to me. I'd tasted it enough times in my life to recognize its flavor. But this was different. This was the kind of fear that curls around your spine and teaches your body to be quiet, small, invisible. I tried going back to my tasks, but my hands shook too much to clean the tables properly. Celine watched me from across the room with a strange sadness in her eyes, like she knew this day would come, like she'd lived it herself. I wanted to ask her about the man on the floor, about what he did, about what she had warned me about earlier. But the rules of this house were clearer than the polished marble under my feet. Curiosity was a crime, and Dante decided the punishment. I kept my head down, but my mind couldn't stop replaying it. The moment Dante looked at that broken man, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with a chilling calm. As if cruelty wasn't cruelty here. It was order. By evening, Celine told me I would be helping prepare the dining room for dinner. Important guests were arriving. Politicians, businessmen, people whose faces had appeared on TV screens I used to watch while eating noodles on the couch. The room transformed into something out of a magazine. Candles glowing in gold holders, white linen smoothed flawlessly, glasses sparkling like tiny moons. As I set the plates, I noticed guards positioning themselves at every corner, standing like statues carved from flesh. Celine showed me where to stand once dinner began. Move only when signaled, she instructed. Speak only if spoken to. Do not make eye contact unless required. Each rule wrapped around my ribs like rope, but I nodded anyway, because I didn't want to end up like the man earlier. And Zariah, she added softly, her voice dropping lower. If you see Dante look at you longer than he should, keep your face neutral. My heart stumbled. Why would he look at me? Celine hesitated. Just a breath, just enough for the truth to show before she hid it again. Because you're new, she whispered. And because he notices things he shouldn't. Before I could ask anything else, she walked away, leaving my chest tight and my mind spiraling. The double doors opened and people began to pour in, men in tailored suits, women in glittering dresses, all of them walking with the confidence of people who believed the world belonged to them. They laughed too loud, spoke too freely, drank like they owned the night. But beneath their polished masks, there was something else. Fear, respect, a silent understanding that in this house, in this room, in this world, they were small compared to the man who ruled it. Dante entered last. The conversations died instantly, like breath pulled from lungs. He wore a black suit that fit him like sin, his hair slightly tousled, his eyes carrying that signature, cold calm that made people straighten themselves without realizing it. He didn't acknowledge the room right away. His gaze swept across the table, the candles, the glasses, the guests, calculating, assessing, controlling. And then, just for a second, his eyes found me. It wasn't a long look. It wasn't a soft one. But it was sharp enough to make my breath catch, sharp enough to make my fingers tremble around the wine bottle I held, sharp enough that Celine's earlier words echoed through me like a warning bell. He notices things he shouldn't. Serving dinner felt like walking a tightrope. Every step had to be precise, every movement controlled. The guests spoke about money, politics, deals made behind closed doors. They laughed like danger wasn't sitting at the head of the table with a glass of whiskey resting between his fingers. When I stepped behind Dante to refill his drink, my hands nearly slipped. His voice brushed my ear, low and barely audible. Steady. My body froze. For a moment, just a moment, it felt like the world narrowed to just the two of us. His presence wrapped around me like smoke, heavy, warm, inescapable. Then he leaned back slightly, his shoulder almost touching me, and my heart kicked against my ribs. Good, he murmured when I poured without spilling. It wasn't praise, it wasn't approval, it was acknowledgement. And somehow that felt even more dangerous. Before I could step away, one of the guests, a man with too much cologne and not enough self control, grabbed my wrist lightly. New girl? He asked, his voice dripping with interest that made my skin crawl. Where'd you find this one, Dante? Dante didn't answer immediately. His eyes moved to the man's hand on my wrist, and something in the room changed. Dante didn't raise his voice. He didn't stand. He didn't even look angry. But the temperature dropped, the tension thickened, and every person at the table went silent. Remove your hand, Dante said, calm but lethal. The man laughed nervously, as if trying to pretend he didn't feel the danger pulsing through the air. Relax. I was just... Remove your hand. The man obeyed instantly, pulling back like he touched a flame. My pulse thundered as I stepped away, almost stumbling, Celine catching my arm before I could embarrass myself. Dante watched me for a moment, long enough to make heat rush to my cheeks, then turned back to his guests as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. A line had been drawn. A message had been sent, and every person in that room understood it. As the dinner continued, I couldn't shake the truth settling like a storm in my chest. Dante Moretti didn't kill for fun. He killed for loyalty, for respect, for control. But the way he looked at me, that wasn't control. That wasn't ownership. That was something far more dangerous. And I was terrified to admit that part of me, some small, naive, reckless part, felt it too. The guests stayed late into the night, their laughter echoing through the mansion long after the candles burned low. When the last car finally pulled away from the estate, the house seemed to exhale, a long, tired breath that revealed just how fragile the earlier performance had been. I walked slowly down the hallway with Celine, my legs aching, my hands still trembling from the moment that man touched me. My mind kept replaying Dante's reaction, the way the room froze, the way his voice turned into cold steel, the way he didn't look at the man. He looked at me, like he was making sure I was okay, like my discomfort was something he couldn't tolerate. Celine paused near the staircase, her gaze sweeping over my face with a kind of quiet understanding. You did well tonight, she said. Most girls would have fallen apart. I didn't feel like I'd done well. I felt shaken, confused, unsteady in ways I couldn't put into words. Why did he intervene? I whispered. Celine hesitated again, that long, heavy silence she used whenever the truth was too sharp to speak openly. Because he's Dante, she answered finally. And Dante doesn't let people touch what's his. The words sent a shiver down my spine. I'm not his, I said quickly. Too quickly. Celine's expression didn't soften, but her eyes did. You don't have to be. Sometimes men like him decide for you. I couldn't sleep after her words. The night stretched endlessly, the moonlight spilling across the floor in quiet pieces. I paced the room, my thoughts a tangle of things I wanted to ignore. I was supposed to hate Dante. That was easy in theory. He owned my father's debt. He owned my freedom. He owned the fear that had marked my days since I arrived. But then there were the other moments, small, quiet, confusing moments that didn't fit the story I told myself about him. The way he'd spoken to me earlier, the way he'd said steady like he didn't want me to embarrass myself, the way he stopped that man from touching me, so fast and fierce it felt personal. I pressed my palms to my face, trying to push the warmth out of my cheeks. I didn't want this. I didn't want to feel anything but hate. But some part of me, some small, disobedient part, felt something else creeping in. Something dangerous, something forbidden. And if Dante noticed it, I didn't know what that would mean for me, or for him. The next morning arrived with a knock that wasn't Celine's. It was softer, hesitant. When I opened the door, a young girl stood there, no older than 12. She had tight curls pulled into a messy puff, wide brown eyes, and a nervous smile that made her seem out of place in this cold mansion. She held a tray with tea and a small bowl of fruit. Mr. Moretti sent this, she said shyly. He said you didn't eat much last night. Shock rippled through me. Dante noticed? The girl, Amira, placed the tray on the table and glanced around my room with the open curiosity most people here were too afraid to show. Are you new? She asked, her voice low and sweet. Yes, I said gently. How long have you been here? Her smile faltered. Long enough. Her answer carried weight she shouldn't have known at her age. My mom works in the kitchen. I help sometimes. She hesitated, then added softly, Mr. Moretti. He scares people, but he's not always what they say. I didn't know how to respond. Not always what they say. The idea unsettled me, because part of me already knew it was true. Amira stepped back toward the door. You should eat, she whispered. He'll ask. And just like that, she darted away, leaving me staring after her, confused, uneasy, and strangely warmed by the small kindness tucked inside this brutal world. Later that day, Celine assigned me to the library, dusting shelves, polishing tables, organizing books that looked older than the country itself. The library was quiet, warm, filled with the soft crackle of a fireplace and the faint scent of leather bindings. For the first time since arriving, I felt a sliver of peace. I ran my fingers along the spines of books I'd never seen before, letting myself drift for a moment into a life where I chose this, where I wasn't trapped, where I wasn't paying for a debt I didn't create. I was reaching for a book on a high shelf when the door opened behind me. I didn't have to turn to know who it was. His presence filled the room before he even spoke. You missed breakfast, Dante said quietly. His voice wasn't cold. It wasn't sharp. It was controlled, intent. I lowered my arm slowly, turning toward him. He took a few steps closer, his eyes scanning my face with an intensity that made my breath falter. Amira said you brought me food, I whispered. Why? He studied me for a long moment, his jaw tight, his eyes carrying something I couldn't decipher. I don't like people collapsing in my house, he said simply. But I knew it wasn't simple. Not with him. Dante Moretti didn't bring food to everyone. He didn't notice when people didn't eat. He didn't soften his voice for anyone. Yet here he was, standing in the quiet of the library, close enough that I could see the faint shadow of stubble on his jaw, close enough that the air between us hummed. He took another step toward me, slow enough to give me time to move away, but I didn't. Or maybe I couldn't. His eyes flickered to my lips, then back to my eyes, as if he caught himself looking somewhere he shouldn't. Zariah, he murmured, my name sounding different in his voice. He lifted a hand slowly, almost hesitantly, like he was reaching without permission from his own mind. His fingers brushed a loose curl that had fallen near my cheek, tucking it gently behind my ear. My heart stumbled violently, my breath locking in my chest. His touch wasn't rough, wasn't demanding. It was soft. A softness that terrified me more than his anger ever could, because anger was predictable. Soft was dangerous. Softness could break me. His hand lingered for a fraction of a second too long. He felt it. I felt it. And when he finally pulled away, the room felt colder. You should eat, he said again, his voice quieter, thicker, as though fighting something inside himself. Then he turned and walked out, leaving the door half open, and my knees so weak I had to grip the edge of the shelf to stay standing. And that was the moment I realized the truth I'd been running from. Dante Moretti was not just my captor. He was becoming something else, something I had no defenses against, something I wasn't allowed to feel, something that could ruin us both. The rest of the day passed in a strange blur, the echo of Dante's touch lingering on my skin like a secret I wasn't supposed to keep. I tried to return to my tasks, but every time I lifted my hand, I could still feel the ghost of his fingers brushing that curl behind my ear. My thoughts tangled around themselves, my breath catching over and over, as if my body couldn't decide whether to fear him or remember the softness he never showed anyone else. By evening, the mansion settled into its usual quiet hum, the sound of distant footsteps, muffled voices, the soft clink of glasses being washed somewhere deep in the kitchen. Celine found me near the hallway arch, carrying a crate of folded linens. She glanced at my face, and something in her eyes shifted immediately. What happened? Her tone wasn't sharp. It wasn't demanding. It was knowing. I shook my head too fast. Nothing. Celine's jaw tightened. She set down the crate with slow deliberation, studying me like she was reading a story written in my eyes. Be careful, Zariah, she whispered. That man, he doesn't touch people. Not unless he owns them. Not unless he's thinking something he shouldn't. My heart stumbled. He doesn't own me, I whispered, but it sounded weak. Fragile. Celine stepped closer. He will, she said quietly, if you let him. And when he does, you won't be the same. Those words followed me like footsteps down a hallway that wouldn't end. The mansion was different at night. That was something I learned quickly. It wasn't the polished, quiet palace it was during the day. At night, it felt alive in a way that made the hairs on my arms rise. Guards moved differently, slower but sharper. The clocks ticked louder. The lights seemed dimmer. And certain doors Celine never explained, were guarded more tightly than usual. She had assigned me to help in the kitchen while the late night meals were prepared for Dante and a few of his top men. I chopped vegetables mechanically, my mind drifting in dangerous directions. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Dante's face in the library. Too close, too intent, too human for the monster he was supposed to be. I hated that part of me responded. I hated that my body remembered the warmth of his hand. I hated that a tiny ember of something had sparked between us, because that ember could kill me. One wrong move in this house didn't mean embarrassment. It meant punishment. It meant consequences. It meant blood. And yet, as much as I tried to push it down, something inside me had already changed. Something I couldn't undo. I was carrying a tray of plates toward the dining room when I heard voices, deep, serious, tense. Dante's voice was unmistakable, calm, controlled, deadly. But there was someone else speaking too, a man whose tone carried a bitterness thick enough to taste. You're slipping, Dante. Everyone sees it. My steps slowed without permission. I hovered near the corner, hidden by the shadows, the tray warming my palms. I don't slip, Dante replied simply. You are now, the man countered. You let one of your own steal from you for 6 months before you noticed. You didn't kill him because of what? Pity? He was loyal once, Dante said. Loyalty is irrelevant when someone betrays you, the man snapped. And now this girl. My heart stopped, dead, still. She's a debt, Dante said, but there was a sharp edge under the denial. A beat of silence followed, thick and heavy. She's a problem, the man said. A distraction. Dante didn't respond. His silence said enough. If you're not careful, the man continued, your enemies will use her against you. My body tensed so hard the tray rattled. This man wasn't wrong. I didn't matter. I wasn't powerful. I wasn't protected. I was an easy target in a world built from violence and secrets. I know what I'm doing, Dante said, but his voice was lower now. Rougher. Do you? The man whispered. Because the last time you let someone close. Dante cut him off with a sound that made the air tremble. A warning. A blade in his throat. Enough. Silence. Thick. Dangerous. Final. When I stepped into the dining room moments later, pretending I had heard nothing, Dante looked up instantly. His eyes found mine like they'd been waiting. His gaze scanned my face, slow and deliberate, reading every breath, every tremble, every lie. The other man, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and colder eyes, glanced at me too, his expression filled with suspicion. This her? He asked quietly. I froze. He wasn't talking to me, but about me, as if I weren't even standing there. Dante didn't look away from me as he answered, yes. Something about the way he said it lit a spark beneath my skin. Dangerous, warm, possessive. The man studied me like I was a puzzle piece that didn't fit. Pretty, he muttered, almost irritated. Pretty is dangerous. I lowered my gaze immediately, gripping the tray so tightly my fingers ached. Dante rose slowly from his chair, and for a moment I felt the room tilt, the air grow thick. He walked toward me with quiet, controlled steps, like a predator closing in. When he stopped in front of me, he reached out, not touching me, but close enough that I felt the heat of his hand. You're dismissed, he said softly. Too softly. The kind of softness that made the world spin. I nodded and stepped back, but his eyes followed me until I disappeared through the doorway. I didn't make it far before my legs started shaking so hard I had to grip the wall for balance. My heart was pounding, my skin hot, my breath scattered. I didn't want this. I didn't want him. I didn't want to be the reason he slipped, or the reason his enemies grew bold, or the reason someone put a target on my back. But the truth slid into me like a blade, sharp, uninvited, undeniable. Dante Moretti was already changing, and the worst part, he was changing because of me. And sooner or later, someone in this house was going to make me pay for that. Sleep avoided me like it had made a promise to the night. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the shadows shifting across the room in ways that made my heart thud against my ribs. Dante's face kept flashing in my mind, the sharpness in his eyes when that man called me a distraction, The way he said yes, as if it meant something deeper, darker. I hated the way my stomach tightened at the memory. I hated how my body reacted, even when my mind screamed at it to stop. The mansion was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. It felt like a quiet before something broke. A thin line stretched too tight. Around 3 in the morning, I finally got up and walked to the window, pressing my forehead against the cold glass. Fog hung low over the grounds, swallowing the lawn in pale silence. Somewhere far off, a guard's flashlight cut through the darkness. I watched it move like a restless ghost. I wondered what they saw when they looked at this house. Power? Prison? A kingdom? A battlefield? I wondered what they thought of the girl trapped behind this window. A servant? A liability? A weakness? My fingers curled against the glass. I didn't want to be anyone's weakness. I didn't want to be the reason anyone fell. But the truth was simple and terrifying. In this world, in Dante's world, emotions weren't softness, they were weapons, and someone would eventually learn to use me against him. By morning, the fog had cleared, but the tension hadn't. Celine came to get me, her expression unusually tight. "Stay close to me today," she murmured. No explanation, no context, just a warning wrapped in calm. I followed her downstairs, my heart already uneasy. When we stepped into the kitchen, the staff was quieter than usual, their eyes darting toward the hallway like they expected something, or someone to walk in. I grabbed a cloth and began helping with the morning setup, trying to look busy while observing the tension humming through the room. A few minutes later, a man entered the kitchen. Not Dante, not one of his usual guards, someone new. Tall, pale, blonde hair slicked back, eyes like polished ice. His smile didn't reach them. "Morning," he said lightly, as though he hadn't just shifted the entire room's temperature. Celine stiffened beside me, her fingers tightening around the tray she held. The man's gaze slid over everyone in the room before landing on me, and when it did, something in his expression changed. Slow amusement curled at the corner of his lips. Not pleasant, not kind, curious in the way a knife is curious about skin. "You must be the girl," he said. He didn't ask, he stated it. My throat tightened. "Which girl?" I asked quietly. His grin widened. "The one Dante's been paying attention to." Celine moved so quickly she almost stepped between us. "Mr. Luca," she said sharply, "you're not allowed." He waved her off, eyes still locked on me. "Relax, I'm just saying hello." I had heard the name Luca whispered by guards before. Quietly, cautiously, never with affection. The moment I realized who he was, my heart dropped. Luca Moretti, Dante's older cousin, the one with a reputation even colder than Dante's, the one rumored to have once slit a man's throat for interrupting his breakfast. He stepped closer, invading my space with a confidence that made the air shrink around us. "Pretty," he murmured, tilting his head. "I can see why Dante's been distracted." Heat prickled under my skin, not from flattery, but from the danger woven into every syllable. Luca didn't sound impressed. He sounded entertained, and entertainment, in men like him, meant trouble. Celine's voice dropped to a low whisper. "Mr. Luca, Mr. Moretti asked that we do not disturb." "Dante asks for many things," Luca interrupted softly, his gaze never leaving mine. "Some of which he should not have." It was a threat, wrapped neatly in silk. Before I could react, the kitchen door opened sharply and Dante stepped inside. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence slammed into the room like a storm hitting glass. The entire staff froze. Celine bowed her head. My breath stopped. Dante's eyes moved immediately to me. Fast, sharp, searching. Then to Luca. The shift in his expression was subtle but chilling. A flash of something dark, territorial. Luca smiled like he'd been waiting for this moment. "Cousin," he drawled lazily, "your new little project is charming." Dante didn't blink. "Step away from her." The words weren't loud. They were low, controlled, but powerful enough to vibrate through the walls. Luca raised a brow. "Is that an order?" "Yes." For a moment, neither moved. The air felt electric, dangerous, thick enough to choke on. This wasn't just a disagreement. This was a line being drawn between two predators. Luca finally took a small step back, smirking. "Interesting," he murmured. "Didn't know you were capable of protecting anything that wasn't business." Dante's jaw tightened. "Leave." Luca chuckled, turning toward the door. But before stepping out, he glanced at me one last time. "Careful, little bird," he whispered. "Men like Dante don't protect things for long." When he was gone, the room exhaled, slowly, shakily. Celine immediately bowed and hurried out with the others, giving me space I wasn't sure I wanted. Dante stood still for a moment, breathing deeply, his shoulders tense like he was trying to cage something wild inside himself. When he finally looked at me, his eyes weren't cold. They were burning, not in anger, not in desire, in something far more terrifying, concern, real, raw concern. You don't go near him, he said quietly. Ever. I swallowed. I didn't. He stepped closer, too close, close enough that I felt the heat of his anger, his fear, his control slipping in ways he wasn't used to. If he touches you, Dante said, voice low, if he even looks at you again like that, I won't restrain myself. My pulse stuttered. Why do you care? For a split second, just one, he looked like he might tell me. The truth, the whole truth, something no one else in this house had heard. But then he looked away, jaw tightening. You're under my protection, he said. That's all. But the way he said it didn't sound like all. It sounded like a lie wrapped in desperation, a truth he wasn't ready to admit. And as I stood there, staring at the man who owned my fate, a terrifying realization curled inside my chest. The more Dante tried to protect me, the more enemies I was going to make. And one of them had already noticed me. Luca. And he wasn't the kind of man who backed away twice. The house didn't return to normal after Luca's visit. It felt like the walls themselves were listening now, like every breath carried secrets that could get someone killed. Everywhere I walked, guards watched me with heavier eyes, not cruel, but cautious, as if simply being in Dante's orbit made me dangerous. Celine kept me close, guiding me through tasks that kept me in the safer parts of the mansion, far from the West Wing where Dante handled his darker business. But even then, I could feel the tension humming through the house like a warning. People talked less, doors shut faster, footsteps moved sharper, and deep down I knew why. I had become a shift in the air, a variable no one expected, a threat no one understood. By midday, Celine sent me to the laundry room for clean linens. It was tucked in a quiet corner of the mansion, a place that always smelled of lavender and steaming fabric. I thought I was alone until I heard the soft scrape of a chair behind me. I turned and froze. One of the guards, a tall man with dark brown skin and tired eyes, sat watching me. I had seen him before. He was quiet, observant, the kind of man who carried too much in his silence. You should be careful, he said softly, not moving from his seat. About Luca. My heart thudded. Why? He rubbed his temples like the words pained him. Because he breaks things Dante cares about. It's how he wins. Something cold slipped through my spine. Why, tell me, he hesitated. Because someone should. And then, almost pleadingly, he added, don't make Dante choose between you and blood. Before I could ask more, he left, leaving me with linen sheets and fear that clung to my ribs like wet cloth. That night, the mansion grew restless again. Shadows moved strangely under the doorframes. Voices rose and fell behind closed rooms. I carried a tray of fresh towels past the hallway near Dante's office when I heard shouting, a sound like glass shattering inside a man's chest. You brought her here, a voice yelled. I recognized it instantly. Luca. Do you know what that means? Dante's voice followed, low and sharp. It means nothing. It means weakness, Luca spat, and weakness gets you killed. I pressed my back to the wall, breath shallow, pulse trembling. Get her out while you can, Luca hissed, before I decide for you. Dante's answer came like a gunshot, quiet but deadly. Touch her, and I'll end you. My whole body froze, not because of the threat, but because of the tone behind it. Possessive, protective, real. Luca laughed, cold, cruel, amused. Careful, cousin, this isn't like last time. Footsteps stormed away. The office door slammed. And I remained frozen in place, chest tight, throat burning with the painful truth. I wasn't just a problem anymore. I was a vulnerability. And Dante was already bleeding because of it. Later, when I finally got back to my room, I found something unexpected on my pillow. A single white rose. No note. No explanation. Just the flower, delicate and quiet, carrying a scent that felt almost out of place in this house built from fear. I stared at it for a long time, my chest tightening. Roses weren't gifts here. Roses weren't symbols of kindness. Roses were warnings, or apologies, or confessions someone wasn't brave enough to speak. I brushed my finger along the soft petals, and for a moment the mansion felt different, gentler, safer, warmer. But the illusion broke when I noticed something small tied to the stem. A single black ribbon. My heart dropped. White roses meant innocence. Black ribbon meant danger. Who left it? I didn't know. But I knew one thing in my bones. Someone in this house was watching me, and not all eyes belonged to Dante. Sleep never came. My thoughts chased each other in circles. Dante's protectiveness, Luca's threat, the guard's warning, the rose lying like a secret on my pillow. My heart swung between fear and something else, something foolish, something soft, something I didn't want to name. Just before dawn, when exhaustion finally numbed my thoughts, I heard a quiet knock. Not firm, not loud, a gentle tap like someone afraid to wake me. I opened the door slowly and nearly lost my breath. Dante stood there, his tie undone, his hair ruffled, eyes darker than the sky behind him. He said nothing at first. Neither did I. We just stared at each other, two people standing on the edge of something far more dangerous than the walls around us. You're not safe, he said finally, not while he's here. A pause, a breath, a truth slipping through the cracks. And I don't know how to fix that. For the first time since I met him, Dante looked unsure, worried, human. And I realized then that whatever was happening between us wasn't one-sided. He felt it. He feared it. He fought it. And that meant I wasn't imagining the shift between us. It was real, and it was going to ruin everything. Dante didn't step inside. He didn't ask to come in. He just stood in my doorway like a man wrestling with the truth he didn't want to name out loud. His shoulders were tense, breath shallow, jaw working silently like he was grinding down the words he refused to speak. I gripped the edge of the door frame, unsure what to do, how to breathe, how to exist with him looking at me like that. Why are you here? My voice barely rose above a whisper. Dante looked away for a moment, eyes flicking down the hall, checking for shadows or ears, then back to me. Luca is unpredictable, he said. He's angry, and when he's angry, he looks for ways to hurt me. A beat. His eyes dipped to my hands, lingering in a way that made heat swirl in my stomach. And right now, he said quietly, you're the easiest way to do that. My breath shuddered. I didn't ask to be. Dante exhaled slowly, something tight and tortured flickering in his eyes. I know. His voice softened, barely but enough to break something inside me. That's why I'm here. The air tingled between us, charged and fragile. I should have been afraid. I should have closed the door. But instead, I stepped closer. Dante's gaze locked onto mine, and for the first time since I arrived, he didn't hide what he felt. Not completely, not behind anger, not behind control, not behind the cold mask he wore like armor. I saw something else, something real, something that pulled me toward him in ways I didn't understand. You shouldn't care, I whispered. His jaw tightened. I don't. But the lie cracked in his voice. Then why are you here? His breath caught. His eyes softened. And for a heartbeat, a single, reckless heartbeat, I thought he might actually tell me the truth. But instead, he shook his head, stepping back as if the space between us had become too dangerous. Stay in your room tonight, he said, his voice rough. Lock the door. Why? I asked, but he didn't answer. He turned and walked away, his footsteps fading into the darkness of the hallway, leaving me with a truth that tasted like fire. Dante wasn't my captor anymore. He was my shadow, my shield, my weakness, and I was becoming his. The next morning, Celine arrived early, too early. She looked exhausted, her normally perfect bun slightly undone, her eyes shadowed with worry. Get dressed, she said quickly. There's been an incident. My stomach twisted. What kind of incident? She paused, breathing hard like she'd been running. One of the guards was found outside the gates last night. She hesitated. Alive, but barely. I felt the world tilt. Was it Luca? Celine's silence was an answer. Downstairs, the mansion buzzed with tension. Guards moved like a storm had torn through them. Voices murmured. Orders snapped. Something heavy hung in the air. Fear, anger, revenge. I wasn't supposed to hear details, but the walls here were thin in the right places. Broken ribs, left him in the mud, message for Dante. Luca's men are watching the estate. Every piece felt like a puzzle clicking toward an explosion. When Celine led me to the kitchen, even the chefs were whispering, their hands shaking slightly as they chopped vegetables. Everyone knew what this meant. Luca wasn't just circling. He had already begun his attack. I spent the afternoon wiping down shelves in the library again. My stomach knotted with dread. Every sound made me flinch. Every footstep made my heart race. I kept waiting for Dante to appear, to tell me something, to assure me he had a plan. But he never came. and that absence felt more terrifying than his anger ever had. When I finally left the library to bring Celine some books she requested, I turned a corner and collided with someone so hard the books flew from my hands. I stumbled back, but a hand shot out and caught my arm. "You should watch where you're going," a low voice said. "Luca." He was smiling, but not the soft kind, not the kind Dante almost gave me. This smile was sharp, hunting. His fingers tightened just enough to make my pulse jump. "You're a brave little thing," he murmured, leaning in, "walking around this house like you belong." My breath shook. "Let me go." His smile sharpened. "Why? Afraid Dante will be upset?" My chest tightened, not because Luca was wrong, but because he wasn't. Before I could answer, footsteps thundered from the end of the hallway. Dante. He didn't yell. He didn't run. He simply stepped closer, eyes locked onto Luca with a fury that felt metallic in the air. "Remove your hand," Dante said softly. Luca laughed. "Twice in 2 days? Careful. People will think you've gone soft." Dante took one more step. "Last warning." Luca's grip loosened. His fingers slipped from my arm, but his eyes didn't leave mine. "Little bird," he whispered, "I'll see you again." I didn't realize my hands were shaking until Dante's fingers wrapped around my wrist, gently this time, firmly, like he was grounding me. "Come with me," he said. No explanation, no permission for refusal. He guided me down the hall, his grip warm, steady, protective in a way that stole the breath from my lungs. He didn't stop until we reached his private office. Once inside, he closed the door and turned toward me with something raw burning in his eyes. "I told you not to go near him," he growled. "I didn't," I whispered. His jaw clenched. "He's coming after you to get to me." Silence filled the room. Thick, hot, dangerous. "What do you want me to do?" I whispered. His breath shook. "Stay alive," he said softly, voice breaking in a way I'd never heard before. "Just stay alive." Dante didn't let me leave his office right away. He paced the room like a caged animal, jaw tight, hands balled into fists, shoulders coiled with tension. I stood near the bookshelf, gripping the edge of a table, afraid to move, afraid to speak, afraid that one wrong breath would push him past the edge he was barely clinging to. "Luca crossed the line," he muttered, dragging his hand through his hair. "Touching you was already too far, but today—" He stopped, turning toward me, eyes dark and bruised with a kind of anger that wasn't meant for me, but could still burn me if I wasn't careful. "Today he showed me what he wants." I swallowed hard. "What's that?" Dante's gaze flickered, and for a second, a raw emotion flashed across his face. Fear. To destroy everything I care about. He paused, his voice dropping even lower. "And he thinks you're the way to do it." The words hit me like a blow. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold. "Why me?" I whispered. "I'm nothing here. I'm nobody." Dante's expression hardened. "You're not nobody." His voice was sharp enough to cut. "You've been here a few weeks, and you've already caused problems I never expected." His jaw tightened. "And that terrifies me." The admission cracked the air open. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what he wanted me to say. All I knew was that something heavy and forbidden pulsed between us, something neither of us had asked for, but both of us felt too deeply. Dante approached slowly, like he was afraid of his own steps, afraid of what being too close to me might do. "This house runs on fear," he said, "on silence, on power, and until you came, I kept things separate." His eyes softened, a dangerous, breathtaking softness that made my knees weaken. "Then I look at you, and everything I've built starts to crack." My heart trembled so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. "I didn't mean for this to happen," I whispered. His lips twitched into something almost like a smile. Pained, conflicted, impossible. "I know." He reached up, slowly, giving me time to back away. But I didn't. His fingers brushed my cheek. Soft. Careful. Like he was touching something fragile, something he had no right to want but couldn't stop himself from reaching for. "Zariah," he murmured, my name a sigh on his tongue. And for one dangerous second, I let myself lean into his touch. But before the moment could deepen, before he could step closer or whisper something reckless, the door burst open. One of the guards rushed inside, breathing hard. "Sir," he said urgently, "we have a situation." Dante's hand dropped instantly, his expression snapping back to cold control. "What happened?" The guard's eyes flicked toward me before returning to Dante. "There's movement outside the gates, not ours." My stomach knotted. Dante's jaw flexed. "Luca's men? We think so." Dante closed his eyes for a brief moment, collecting himself, burying whatever softness had almost surfaced. When he opened them again, he wasn't the man who touched my cheek. He was the Mafia king people feared. Get her to the east wing, he ordered. Lock it down. My breath hitched. Dante. His gaze snapped to mine, dark and protective and angry all at once. Don't argue. I didn't. I couldn't. Because Luca wasn't coming for Dante tonight. He was coming for me. They rushed me through the halls, Celine leading the way, her face carved with tension. Guards followed us closely, checking corners, whispering updates into radios clipped to their belts. The mansion's atmosphere shifted, every light dimming, every door locking, every guard on high alert. We reached the east wing, and Celine ushered me inside my room before turning to close the door. I grabbed her wrist. Celine, what do they want? She paused, her eyes softening with a sadness that made my throat burn. Luca wants to hurt Dante, she whispered, and hurting you would destroy him. My heart stopped, completely. Dante didn't just care. He cared enough that losing me would break him. The realization hit like a tidal wave, terrifying and beautiful and impossible. I stood by the window after she left, watching shadows move across the grounds, guards running back and forth, radios crackling. Something crashed outside, something loud enough that I flinched. I backed away from the glass, pressing myself against the wall, trying to breathe. Minutes felt like hours. Silence came in waves, broken by distant shouting, and then footsteps. Soft, controlled. Moving toward my door, I held my breath. The lock clicked, the handle turned. The door opened slowly, and someone stepped inside. Not Dante, not Celine, not a guard. Luca. He slipped inside like a shadow, closing the door behind him with a quiet click. My breath choked in my throat. He didn't smile this time. He didn't smirk. He didn't even pretend. His eyes were cold, assessing, hungry in a way that had nothing to do with desire and everything to do with power. Little bird, he murmured, you're a hard one to reach. I backed away instinctively, but there was nowhere to go. The room felt smaller with him inside it, the air thicker, the walls closer. What do you want? My voice shook, but I tried to keep it steady. Luca stepped closer, hands casually in his pockets, as if he were strolling through a garden and not breaking into a locked wing. You're causing problems, he said. Not because of anything you're doing. His gaze dragged over me slowly, but because of how he reacts. My heart pounded violently. I didn't ask for that. No, he said softly, but you became it anyway. He moved another step closer, and I pressed against the wall, my breath quickening. He cares about you, Luca whispered. The truth hung in the air like smoke, thick, undeniable, dangerous. And that, he continued, makes you my favorite weapon. I shook my head. Please, please don't. His hand shot out, grabbing my chin, tilting my face up. Not gently, not carefully. Don't beg, he whispered. Not yet. My eyes stung with fear as he leaned closer, his breath brushing my skin, his voice lowering to something far more chilling. You think Dante will protect you? He murmured. You think he can? His thumb brushed my jaw, making my stomach twist with dread. Men like him don't get to love, he said. Everything they love dies. My breath cracked. I don't love him, I whispered. He smiled, slow, cruel, unconvinced. Maybe not, he said, but he loves you. My whole body froze, because Luca wasn't teasing. He wasn't provoking. He was stating a fact. A sudden noise outside the door tore through the moment. Heavy footsteps, raised voices, the unmistakable sound of weapons being drawn. Luca's eyes flicked toward the door, and a dark smile curled at his lips. Looks like the king is coming, he whispered. Time for the queen to choose sides. Without warning, he yanked me close, his arm gripping my waist. My gasp didn't even have time to escape before the door burst open. Dante. He didn't hesitate. He didn't speak. He didn't blink. He crossed the room with murder in his eyes. Let her go, Dante growled, his voice low enough to crack the floor. Luca dragged me half behind him, keeping his grip tight, his smirk growing. You're slipping, cousin, he taunted. Look at you, breathing hard, shaking. Dante's fists clenched at his sides, his jaw ticked. The veins in his arms stood out like ropes. You touch her, he whispered, and I'll bury you alive. Luca laughed softly, leaning close to my ear. Hear that, little bird? He murmured. The lion's roaring for you. Dante took a step forward. Luca tightened his hold around my waist. I flinched, a small sound escaping my lips, barely audible but enough. Dante's expression shattered. Rage tore through him like wildfire. And for the first time since I'd met him, I saw Dante Moretti lose control. Completely. He lunged. Luca shoved me aside. They collided with a force that shook the room. The fight was brutal, fast, raw. A storm made of fists, curses, and years of buried hatred. I stumbled back, hitting the wall, watching helplessly as the two men crashed into furniture, knocking over chairs, slamming into the dresser. Luca grabbed Dante by the throat. Dante slammed him against the wall. Luca swung a punch. Dante dodged and drove his fist into Luca's jaw with a sound that made the room tremble. "She isn't yours to use," Dante roared. "She isn't yours at all." Luca spat blood onto the floor. "She will be," he hissed. "If I kill you first." Guards flooded the doorway. Cellini screamed my name. Dante threw the final punch, one that sent Luca crashing to the floor. Before Luca could rise, guards restrained him, pulling him back, pinning his arms. Dante didn't take his eyes off him, not even for a second. His chest heaved with fury, his eyes wild. "If you come near her again," Dante whispered, voice broken, "I swear on my father's grave, I'll end you." Luca laughed, bloody, breathless, unbroken. "That's the problem," he croaked. "You already have." And with one last smirk, he was dragged away. Dante turned to me slowly, his breath shaking, his hands trembling like the fight was still happening inside him. He crossed the space between us in 3 steps, cupping my face gently but urgently, his thumbs brushing tears I didn't realize had fallen. "Are you hurt?" he whispered. I shook my head, breath unsteady. "Dante." He pressed his forehead to mine, breathing me in like he needed it to survive. "I thought I lost you," he whispered. I thought he... His voice broke, and something inside me broke with it. His hands slid from my cheeks to my shoulders, down my arms, gripping me as if grounding his sanity. "You can't be alone again," he said. "Not while he's here." And softly, brokenly, he whispered the words that changed everything. "I can't lose you." They locked down the mansion for the rest of the night. Guards swept every hallway, every entrance, every window. Celine stayed close to me, but Dante didn't leave my side. Not once. He walked me to a different room, one farther from the east wing, deeper inside the mansion, a place he said was safer. His room. The moment we stepped inside, I felt his world around me. Dark walls, deep scents of cedar and smoke, shelves stacked with books I wouldn't have expected him to read, a piano sitting quietly in the corner like it held stories no one else knew. He closed the door behind us, and the silence settled like a blanket, heavy, warm, intimate. I stood in the center of the room, unsure where to look, unsure how to breathe. Dante watched me from a few steps away, his chest rising and falling with slow, controlled breaths he was barely holding together. "Sit," he said quietly, not commanding, not cold, concerned. I sat on the edge of his bed, my fingers twisting together. He knelt in front of me, his eyes scanning my face for injuries. "Tell me if he touched you," he whispered. "Tell me exactly where." My breath caught. He didn't. Dante closed his eyes in relief, letting out a slow exhale. "Good, good." His hands hovered near my knees, not touching but close enough to feel. "I swear I'll kill him," he murmured. "I swear." "Dante," I whispered, his eyes open, soft, tormented. "Don't become a monster for me." Something in his expression shattered. He rose slowly, sitting beside me on the bed, close enough that our shoulders brushed, close enough that I felt his warmth seep through my skin. "I already am," he whispered. "Luca didn't make me this way." He paused, his voice trembling. "But you make me want to be something else." The confession knocked the breath from my lungs. "Why?" I whispered. "Why me?" Dante stared at the floor as though the truth was too heavy to lift. "Because you look at me without fear." He glanced at me. "Because you speak to me like I'm human." His voice deepened. "Because when I touch you, I feel..." He shut his eyes again. "Things I shouldn't." The air crackled between us, raw, dangerous, magnetic. Without thinking, my fingers brushed his hand, slowly, softly, asking without words. Dante inhaled sharply. He turned his hand, letting my fingers slip into his, closing around them like he realized he'd been waiting for that touch longer than he expected. His head lowered, his forehead touching our joined hands. "I'm losing control," he whispered. "And you're the reason." My heart pounded. "Then let go," I breathed. He lifted his head slowly, his gaze locking onto mine. His eyes weren't cold. They weren't cruel. They were full of longing, fear, desire, desperation, and something deeper, something he was terrified to name. He leaned in, slowly, painfully slowly, giving me every chance to pull away. I didn't. I couldn't. Our breaths mingled. His hand lifted to my cheek again, fingers trembling. Zariah, he whispered, my name breaking in his throat. Just before his lips brushed mine, a knock shattered the moment. Celine's voice came through the door. Dante, it's urgent. He pulled back instantly, breathing hard, eyes burning with frustration and something close to agony. Stay here, he whispered, pressing my hand one last time before standing. He opened the door only enough to slip outside, and just before it closed, I heard Celine whisper something that made my blood run cold. We found a note. A pause. It's for her, for me, left by Luca. The note Luca left for me was small, folded twice, and far too light to hold the amount of dread it carried. Celine handed it to Dante first, her hand trembling slightly as she stepped back. I watched Dante unfold it, watched his eyes drop to the words written in that sharp, elegant handwriting I had come to fear. His jaw tightened, his breathing changed, and then slowly he looked at me, not with anger, not with panic, with something far heavier, something that told me the note wasn't a threat, it was a promise. He walked toward me with the paper still in his hand. Don't panic, he said softly. Just listen. My heart hammered against my ribs. What does it say? Dante hesitated, as if saying the words out loud would give Luca power he didn't want him to have. Finally he spoke, voice low even. He said, you shouldn't hide your diamonds in a lion's den. They might forget who they belong to. The room felt like it tilted. My throat went dry. Celine crossed her arms tightly. He's testing you, she whispered. He wants to see how far Dante will go. Dante crushed the note in his fist. He's not going to get that chance. But I could hear something beneath his anger. Fear. Fear that Luca had slipped past his guards. Fear that he had reached me in the one place Dante swore to keep me safe. And fear that this was only the beginning. He walked me back into his room, closing the door gently, carefully, like any sudden movement might shatter me. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to breathe through the panic climbing up my throat. Dante dropped the crushed note on the nightstand and crouched in front of me, his large hands resting carefully on my knees, not gripping, not claiming, just grounding me. Zariah, he murmured, look at me. I did, and what I saw in his eyes startled me more than the break-in. He wasn't angry. He wasn't cold. He wasn't towering above me like he always did. He was human, worried, fragile in a way he refused to show anyone else. He won't touch you again, Dante said. Not while I'm breathing. I swallowed hard. But he got in here. Dante closed his eyes briefly. Yes, and that's on me. His hands slid from my knees to my hands, enclosing them in warmth that didn't match the fear in my chest. I won't let it happen again. Not ever. The intensity in his voice made my breath hitch. This wasn't the Mafia king speaking. This wasn't the man the world feared. This was the man who almost kissed me. The man who pulled me behind him when danger came. The man who fought his own blood for touching me. And even though fear pulsed inside me like a heartbeat, something else pulsed with it. Something dangerous, warm, undeniable. He stood slowly, pulling me up with him. You're staying here tonight, he said. Where I can see you. I froze. In your room? He nodded. You'll take the bed. And you? I'll be on the couch. I glanced toward the wide leather couch in the corner. That doesn't look comfortable. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Comfort isn't my concern tonight. I swallowed, nerves fluttering in my stomach. Dante, what if Luca comes back? He stepped closer, his hand lifting slowly toward my cheek. Then he'll regret it, he murmured. His thumb brushed a tear I didn't realize had fallen. I promise you that. His touch lingered for just a moment, warm enough to calm me, dangerous enough to shake me, before he pulled away. Get some sleep, he said softly. I'll be right here. But sleep didn't come. Not easily. I lay on Dante's bed, curled beneath the blankets, staring at the shape of him on the couch. He sat with one hand folded over his chest, eyes open, body still, like he wasn't resting but guarding, watching, waiting. Hours passed. The storm inside me didn't quiet. Images of Luca's cold smirk, Dante's unrestrained rage, the crash of their fight, the fear choking my throat, all of it looped again and again. I turned in the bed, exhaling shakily. Dante? He lifted his head. Yes? Are you awake? A soft huff of breath. I'm not sleeping until you do. I closed my eyes, then opened them again. I can't, I whispered. Dante stood and crossed to the bed, sitting on the edge, close enough for the mattress to dip beneath his weight. Nightmares? Worse? I whispered. Memories. Dante's brow softened. He turned slightly toward me, his posture gentle in a way I'd never seen from him before. Tell me, he said, if it helps. But how could I tell him? That the fear wasn't just from Luca's hands on my waist or the cold whisper in my ear. It was from the way my heart had leapt when Dante came through the door. From the way his rage felt like protection, not violence. From the way I wasn't afraid of him anymore, in the ways I should be. I shook my head. You'll think I'm weak. Zariah, he murmured, I have seen men beg for their lives. I have seen killers cry. I have seen monsters break. His eyes held mine. You are none of those things. My heart clenched. Then what am I? Dante lowered his gaze to my hand, resting on the blanket. Slowly, carefully, he covered it with his. You, he whispered, are the only thing in this house that reminds me I'm still human. The words hit me like a breath I'd been waiting for without knowing it. Heat rushed to my cheeks. Dante. He shook his head slightly, eyes burning with something I didn't have the courage to name. Sleep, he said again. I'll be here. But still, sleep refused me. The room was dark except for the faint glow of the moon cutting across the floor. Dante sat beside me longer than he should have, his hands still covering mine, like he was afraid to pull away. I wasn't sure what scared me more, the danger outside the room or the danger sitting quietly next to me. Eventually, he stood, slowly, reluctantly, as if leaving the warmth between us was the last thing he wanted. Try to rest, he murmured, brushing a hand through his hair. The house is secure now. I watched him walk back to the couch, watched the tension in his shoulders, the heaviness in his steps. He looked tired, not physically, but in his spirit. Like protecting me was slowly unraveling pieces of him he didn't know how to put back together. When he lay down on the couch, he didn't close his eyes. He stared at the ceiling, jaw clenching lightly every few breaths. He was thinking too much, and every thought felt like it involved me. It must have been hours before exhaustion finally forced my body to surrender. When I woke again, the room was still dark, but the couch was empty. My heart jumped. Dante? I whispered into the silence. No answer. I sat up quickly, fear prickling through my skin. The door was cracked open, barely. A sliver of warm light cut through the darkness. I slipped quietly out of the bed and pushed the door open. The hallway stretched long and quiet, shadows dancing along the walls. Then I heard it. Voices, low, urgent. One of them was Dante's. I moved closer, pressing myself to the wall near the corner. He's escalating, Dante said, voice taut. This wasn't a message. It was a test. He wanted to see how close he could get before I snapped. Another voice, deeper, older, spoke next. Well, you snapped. The entire house heard it. He put his hands on her, Dante snapped back. What did you expect me to do? There was a heavy pause. I expected you to be smarter. Dante exhaled hard, pacing. What does that mean? It means you're losing control, the man said. And when you lose control, we lose power. Another pause. Then more quietly. She is changing you, Dante. The words stabbed me from the shadows. I held my breath as silence filled the hallway. I imagined Dante's face, the tightening of his jaw, the flicker of defiance in his eyes. Is that a problem? He asked darkly. It's a weakness, the man replied. And Luca sees it. Dante's voice dropped to a low, dangerous rumble. I will not let him use her. You already have, the man countered. He got to her room. He left her a message. He walked out alive. That should terrify you. Dante didn't speak for several seconds. When he finally did, his voice sounded broken. It does. Something inside me twisted painfully. I wanted to step out, to tell him I didn't want to be the reason he lost control, that I didn't want to be the weakness his enemies used. But my feet stayed rooted to the floor. You can't keep her here, the man insisted. Not in this house. My heart stopped. You think I should let her go? Dante asked, voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. I think, the man said, you need to decide what you're willing to lose. The sound of a hand slamming against the wall echoed down the hall. I already know the answer, Dante growled. Footsteps moved. I backed away quickly, slipping into the darkness of his room before they could turn the corner. When Dante returned, he found me sitting upright in bed, trying to slow my breathing. His steps stopped at the doorway. He stared at me in the shadows, and even though he didn't say a word, I knew he could sense it. The shift in the air, the questions burning in my eyes. How much did you hear? He asked quietly. I swallowed. Enough. He closed his eyes, leaning against the door frame as though my answer weighed more than anything Luca had done. Zariah. I shook my head. Dante, I don't want to be the reason you. Stop, he said, sharper than intended. He walked toward me, stopping at the side of the bed. You're not the reason for anything. That man said, I don't care what he said. His voice softened suddenly, painfully. I only care about keeping you alive. My throat tightened. And what does that cost you? Dante looked away then, jaw flexing, eyes shining with truth he wasn't ready to voice. Everything. He sat on the bed next to me, not as close as last time, but close enough that I felt the heat of him, the weight of him, the war happening inside him. I should send you away, he said quietly. The words sank straight into my chest, heavy and cold. Away from this house, away from Luca, away from me. My breath trembled. Do you want to? Dante looked at me then, really looked, and the answer was in his eyes before he said it. No. The single word carried so much pain, so much fear, so much want, that it made my heart stumble. But I have to decide what keeps you safe. I forced the words out. If leaving keeps me alive. Dante shook his head violently. No, don't say that. Don't ever say that. His hands flexed at his sides, as if resisting the urge to touch me. You don't understand, Zariah. If I send you away, Luca will find you. You'll be alone. And if I stay, his eyes softened in a way that felt like a promise and a warning at once. If you stay, I can protect you. I met his gaze. But it breaks you. It breaks me either way. The silence between us thickened, charged with everything we weren't saying. Dante exhaled shakily and rose again. Get some rest, he said softly. Tomorrow, we'll figure out the next step. He stepped away from the bed, but before reaching the couch, he hesitated. Zariah? I looked up. Yes? His voice dropped into something low and honest. Don't be afraid of me. My chest tightened. I'm not. A faint breath left him, almost a sigh of relief. He turned away, settling on the couch. But I lay awake the rest of the night, staring at the ceiling, replaying one truth over and over. Dante wasn't afraid of Luca. He wasn't afraid of the war coming. He was afraid of losing me. And that meant the danger wasn't outside the house anymore. It was inside our hearts. I didn't remember falling asleep, only waking up to the feeling of sunlight brushing across my face. For a moment, I forgot where I was, the soft sheets, the gentle warmth, the quiet. For one brief breath, I imagined I was back home in the little apartment above the liquor store, waking to the sound of my father humming in the kitchen. But then I opened my eyes and saw Dante standing at the window, bathed in morning light, his shoulders rigid, his hands gripping the frame like he was holding the world back with nothing but willpower. His voice was low when he finally spoke. We need to leave the estate. I pushed myself upright. Why? What happened? Dante didn't turn around. Luca made his move. Fear pricked my skin. What did he do? Dante exhaled a long, trembling breath. He met with a faction that hates me more than he does. He's forming an alliance. My blood ran cold. Against you? Dante finally turned, his face a storm of fury and exhaustion. Against us. Celine knocked once before entering. She carried a duffel bag and a tension in her jaw that I had never seen before. The car is ready, she said softly. We need to go now. Dante nodded, but his eyes were on me. Always on me. Zariah, he said quietly, you have to trust me. I didn't hesitate. I do. He watched me for a long moment, long enough that Celine politely looked away, then crossed the room and cupped the side of my face with both hands. His forehead rested against mine, our breaths mingling. Whatever happens next, he whispered, don't leave my side. My heart thudded. I won't. His hand slid down to my shoulders before he forced himself to step back. Let's go. The mansion was a blur of movement, guards packing weapons, radios buzzing, boots pounding on marble. They parted for Dante like he was both their leader and their last hope. Celine walked close to me, one hand on my back as if shielding me from every pair of watchful eyes. When we stepped outside, the sun was rising over the estate, washing the grounds in gold. It should have been beautiful. But with the tension in the air, it felt more like the calm before a massacre. Dante opened the back door of the black SUV and guided me in with a hand on my waist. Gentle, protective, trembling just slightly. He got in beside me while Celine sat in front and 2 guards climbed in behind the wheel. The gates opened. We hadn't been driving 10 minutes before Dante stiffened beside me. He leaned forward, voice sharp. "Stop the car." The driver obeyed instantly. Dante's eyes were locked on the rearview mirror. "We're being followed." Celine looked back. "Luca?" "No," Dante said, worse. My pulse spiked. The second vehicle approached fast, too fast. A black sedan, windows tinted, no plates. My breath hitched. "Dante." The sedan swerved, speeding beside us, and for a split second I saw the driver, a man with a scar running from his eyebrow to his jaw. Not Luca, but definitely sent by him. "Go," Dante barked. "Take the side road." The SUV lurched forward, tires screeching against asphalt. The sedan followed, closing the gap. My heart slammed against my ribs. Dante reached across me and buckled my seatbelt, his hand shaking. "Get down," he ordered. I ducked as the first gunshot shattered the rear window. Everything happened fast. Celine screamed for the driver to turn. The guard shouted. Bullets cracked through glass, metal, air. Dante covered me with his body, shielding my head with his hands, his breath warm against my hair. "Stay down," he whispered fiercely. "I've got you." Another gunshot whistled past. The SUV swerved sharply. My shoulders slammed into Dante's chest. He didn't move. He was a wall, a shield, a promise wrapped in flesh and bone. "We're losing them," the driver yelled. "Keep going," Dante barked, but the car behind wouldn't quit. I lifted my head just enough to see them pull beside us again. The man pointed his gun through the window. Dante saw it too. "Down!" he roared. He pushed my head beneath his chest just as the bullet tore past where my face had been a second earlier. Then, suddenly, silence. The SUV slowed. The driver's voice was shaky. "They turned off. They're gone." Dante slowly released me, but his hand stayed on my shoulders as he scanned me for injuries. "Are you hurt?" "No," I breathed. "Dante, are you?" He shook his head, though blood stained his sleeve. "Just a scratch." Celine climbed into the back seat to help him, but Dante pushed her hands away. "Check her," he insisted. "I'm fine." Celine looked torn, but did as he asked. Dante exhaled shakily and leaned back, head against the seat, eyes closed for just a moment. When he opened them, they locked onto mine. "This is only the beginning," he said softly. "Luca won't stop. Not until he takes something from me." I swallowed. "Why me?" Dante reached out, curling his fingers around mine. "Because you're the one thing he knows I can't lose." We reached a safe house in the woods, small, quiet, hidden between tall pines. Inside was a single living room, a kitchen, and one bedroom in the back. Celine began securing the doors while Dante led me inside with a hand on my lower back. "You'll stay here," he said, "with me." The room was dimly lit, dust floating in the sunbeams. It felt old, lived in, safe in a way the mansion never had. Dante took a slow breath as though being here allowed him to finally lower his guard. Just a little. But then he turned to me, and the weight of everything that had happened settled over us like gravity. "Zariah," he murmured, stepping closer, "I need you to understand something." I held his gaze. His eyes softened with something raw and terrifying. "I'm done pretending I don't care." My breath caught. "Dante." He lifted a hand to my cheek, gentle, reverent, almost shaking. "When Luca touched you, something inside me snapped. When I found you in that room last night, everything I buried for years tore open." His thumb brushed my skin. "I don't know how to stop feeling this, and I'm not sure I want to." I didn't speak. I couldn't. The air between us thickened, warm and dangerous. Dante stepped closer until our foreheads touched, his breath shaky against my lips. "Tell me to stop," he whispered. "Please, tell me to stop." But I didn't. I couldn't, because somewhere between fear and fire, between danger and desire, something inside me had already chosen him. I lifted my hand and touched his face, slow, unsure, trembling. Dante inhaled sharply, his whole body tensing under my fingers. "Zariah," he whispered, and then his lips touched mine. It wasn't fierce. It wasn't rushed. It was soft, desperate, a man tasting a feeling he denied himself far too long. His hand slid behind my neck, pulling me gently into him. My heart raced, my breath stuttered, my body melting into his warmth. The kiss deepened, slow, aching, full of everything we both tried to bury. When he finally pulled back, our breaths tangled. "I shouldn't have done that," he whispered, "but I can't be sorry." My fingers curled into the front of his shirt. "Then don't be." He rested his forehead against mine, eyes closed, voice breaking. "I never wanted anyone. Not like this. Not ever." His breath trembled against my lips. And now, if I lose you, I lose myself. Before I could answer, the front door slammed open. Celine burst inside, breathless, pale. Dante, she gasped. Luca. Dante stiffened. What about him? Celine swallowed hard. He didn't ally with one faction. Her voice shook. He allied with all of them. Dante's blood drained from his face. All? Every enemy you have. A cold silence fell. Celine's voice broke. They're coming here. Dante pulled me behind him instinctively, fury igniting in his eyes. Get the car. Celine shook her head slowly, hopelessly. There's no time. Dante's breath caught as he looked at me. Zariah, he whispered. Stay behind me, no matter what happens. I nodded, heart pounding, hands trembling. Outside, engines rumbled. Doors slammed. Footsteps approached in the dozens. Dante's jaw clenched, his arm wrapped around me protectively. If anything happens to me, don't, I whispered desperately. Don't say that. He cupped my face one last time, eyes burning with everything we didn't have time to say. I love you, he breathed. I know this is the worst moment to say it, but if I die tonight, I need you to know. My breath shattered. Tears blurred my vision. Dante, he kissed me, fierce, desperate, final, and turned toward the door. It burst open, and everything became gunfire, shouting, chaos. Dante shoved me to the ground, shielding me with his body. Celine dragged me behind the couch as bullets tore through the wood. Dante fought like a storm, merciless, unstoppable, a man with everything to lose. But there were too many. Luca's voice cut through the chaos. Give her to me, Dante. Dante roared, over my dead body. That can be arranged, Luca snarled. The shots got closer. Dante stumbled as a bullet grazed his side. My scream tore out of me. Dante, he turned toward me, eyes bright, fierce, alive. Stay down. He fired again, taking out one of Luca's men, but another rushed him from behind. Dante spun, slammed him against the wall, fought like he was fighting fate itself, but Luca was winning. A bullet hit the couch inches from my head. Celine cried out. Another explosion of gunfire shattered the window. Luca shouted, enough! More footsteps, more guns. Dante staggered back, bleeding. Luca stepped forward, gun raised. Move, he growled, or she dies. Dante lowered his gun. My heart stopped. Dante, no, Zariah, he said without looking back. I'm right here. Luca stepped closer. Kneel. Dante didn't move. Luca cocked the gun. Kneel, cousin. Dante breathed once, sharp, final, and dropped to his knees. No, I cried, lunging forward, but Cellini grabbed me. Wait. Dante lifted his hand slowly, eyes never leaving mine. Luca aimed at his head. Say goodbye, Dante. The world shattered. My scream tore from my soul. Stop. Luca hesitated, just a second, startled by the force of my voice. Dante's eyes widened. That second was all Cellini needed. She lunged from behind the wall, firing 2 shots into Luca's shoulder. Luca dropped his gun with a howl. Dante surged to his feet, grabbed me, and pulled me behind him. Gunfire erupted again, but Dante didn't stop. He dragged me toward the back door as Celine covered us. Run, she screamed. We sprinted through the woods, branches tearing at my clothes. Dante clutched my hand like letting go meant death. Behind us, shouts echoed, gunshots. Chaos. Then the rumble of engines. Dante pulled me into a narrow side road and toward another car hidden beneath branches. He shoved me inside. Drive, he told the guard behind the wheel. The engine roared. The car shot forward. I collapsed into Dante's arms, shaking uncontrollably. He held me tightly, his blood smearing my shirt. You're safe, he whispered. I've got you. I buried my face in his chest, sobbing. I thought you were dead. His arms tightened. I'll never leave you. Not willingly. Not ever. Hours later, when we finally reached a safe point far from the chaos, Dante cupped my face gently. It's over, he said softly. Luca will be dealt with. My breath trembled. What about us? Dante rested his forehead on mine. We survived, he whispered. That means we get to choose now. My heart thudded painfully. Choose what? Each other. The words cracked through the last of my fear. I don't want to be afraid anymore, I whispered. Dante brushed a tear from my cheek. Then don't be. For the first time, I breathed. I'm not. Dante kissed me again, slow, deep, certain, sealing everything we had survived. Pain, betrayal, blood, fire. But together we were still standing, and that was the beginning, not the end. If you stayed with me all the way to the end of this story, thank you. Not just for listening, but for feeling every moment with me. I know this wasn't an easy journey. I know some moments hurt to hear. Some moments made your chest tighten. Some moments made you wonder if love can survive the kind of darkness we walk through. But if my story taught you anything, let it be this. You don't get to choose the people life throws at you, but you do get to choose who you become because of them. I survived betrayal. I survived fear. I survived the kind of love that came wrapped in danger and blood and fire. And somehow, I found myself on the other side. If this story touched something inside you, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Your words matter more than you know. If you want more stories like this, stories about strength, survival, haunting love, and impossible choices, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on your notifications so you don't miss the next chapter of this journey. Thank you for watching. Thank you for feeling. And until we meet again, stay safe, stay human, and never forget, some hearts are worth fighting for, even in the dark.